Welcome to the Vault of Lost Tales podcast.
So, when you think of Washington Irving, you probably think of, well, Rip Van Winkle, right?
Or maybe Sleepy Hollow, The Headless Horseman,
Oh,
those classic tales.
exactly. Those charming, almost cozy stories. But have you ever come across The Adventure of the German Student?
Ah, yes. That one's different. It's much darker, actually.
It really is. Quite unsettling. A big contrast to his usual stuff.
Absolutely. It shows a whole other side to Irving, you know? More psychological, kind of macabre.
Yeah. And as you know, you sent over some fascinating material about Irving's life and this particular story. So for this deep dive, we really want to try and connect the dots. Who was this guy, Washington Irving? What was going on in his life? And crucially, how might that have influenced this really quite chilling story?
That's the goal, right? To see how the author's own experiences, the world he lived in, might illuminate why he wrote something like this. It gives you a much richer understanding.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Irving's birth year, 1783. That was a pretty significant time.
Huge time. He was born the very week New York got the news the American Revolution was over. The ceasefire.
Wow.
And his parents actually named him after George Washington.
No kidding. George Washington Irving.
Well, Washington Irving. But yes, named for the man himself. So, you know, right from birth, he's tied into this new nation's identity.
That's quite a namesake. But it sounds like young Irving wasn't exactly destined for military or political greatness himself. He was more imaginative.
That's a good way to put it. He wasn't the most focused student, apparently. Loved adventure stories, loved the theater.
Sounds relatable.
Yeah, he preferred a good play to, well, his schoolwork.
But this love of stories took a bit of a turn, didn't it? When he was sent up to the Hudson Valley because of a yellow fever outbreak?
Right, in 1798, that was key. He spent time near Tarrytown, soaked up the landscape, but also all those Dutch ghost stories and local legends.
Ah, so the seeds of Sleepy Hollow were planted early.
You can really see it. That mix of natural beauty and spooky folklore, it clearly stuck with him.
And he started writing pretty young, too, right? Under a fake name.
He did, yeah. Jonathan Oldstyle. He wrote these observational letters for a New York newspaper back in 1802. He was only 19.
Jonathan Oldstyle. I like that. Already playing with personas?
It shows he was engaging with the world around him, commenting on society even then. Got him noticed a bit.
Then his brother sent him off to Europe. That must have been eye-opening.
Definitely. 1804 to 1806. It wasn't strictly an academic tour, but he saw a lot, met different people, picked up social skills. It broadened his perspective immensely.
And he even thought about painting.
Briefly, yeah, when he was in Rome, shows that artistic side was always there, looking for an outlet.
Interesting. So he comes back, tries law, but maybe wasn't fully committed.
It seems that way. He studied, got admitted to the bar in 1806, but reports suggest, well, his passion wasn't really there. Maybe a classic conflict, you know, practical career versus artistic calling.
And then something really difficult happened. The death of his fiancée, Matilda Hoffman.
Yes, a profound loss for him. It hit him very hard.
And it's often striking how personal tragedy can sometimes feed creativity. Did that happen here?
It seems so. It was around this time he wrote his first big hit, A History of New York, under that Diedrich Knickerbocker name. Even though it's satire, that experience of grief, that brush with mortality, it likely informed his writing, maybe even laid some groundwork for exploring darker themes later on.
Right, so we have this picture emerging, a young man drawn to art, experiencing loss, finding his voice. Okay, let's jump ahead. He goes back to Europe in 1815, and this time he stays for 17 years.
A long time. He initially went for family business reasons over in England, but the business went bankrupt, so he made a huge decision. Stay in Europe and commit fully to being a writer.
And that paid off. That's when the sketchbook came out.
Exactly. That was the breakthrough. Rip Van Winkle, Sleepy Hollow, that collection made him famous, really established his name internationally.
Amazing success. But The Adventure of the German Student comes a bit later, 1824, in Tales of a Traveler. And things weren't quite so smooth for him then, were they?
No, that's a really important point. He was struggling with writer's block around that time, and he'd also suffered another loss. His brother William had died. So you have this period of creative difficulty mixed with personal grief. It makes sense that the work emerging then, like the German student story, might have a darker, more introspective quality.
And he was living in Paris part of this time, working on French play translations.
Yes, which put him right there in France, absorbing the culture. Maybe not deep in the political fray, but still the echoes of the revolution, the atmosphere. that must have been present.
Especially for a story set during the Reign of Terror.
Precisely. Even being somewhat removed, living in Paris post-revolution, that proximity to a place that had seen such upheaval, it could easily seep into the mood of his writing, into the anxieties of his characters.
Okay, let's talk about the story itself. And the student, Gottfried Wolfgang. One source we saw called him, well, let's just say, a depressed, somewhat self-absorbed young man. Is that fair?
Slight chuckle. It's blunt, but it captures something. Wolfgang is definitely portrayed as highly intellectual, melancholic, drawn to dark ideas, maybe a bit disconnected from reality.
How so?
Well, he gets lost in these wild and speculative doctrines, believes in dark forces influencing him. There's a sense he's more comfortable in abstract thought than in, the messy reality of life. Perhaps Irving saw something of himself in that during times of struggle, or maybe it was an observation of a certain type of romantic intellectualism.
And setting it during the Reign of Terror, that historical moment of extreme ideology leading to horrific violence.
Yeah.
You mentioned Irving disliked extremism.
Yes, sources suggest he had a strong aversion to fanaticism, to overly confident, rigid opinions that ignored human cost. The Reign of Terror is the ultimate example of that, isn't it? Idealism curdling into brutality.
So the setting isn't just wallpaper, it's thematic.
Absolutely. It's a backdrop that embodies the dangers Irving seemed wary of. Placing Wolfgang, this introspective, perhaps detached student, into that cauldron of violence and paranoia, it creates a powerful tension. It asks questions about what happens when ideas lose touch with humanity.
One analysis pointed to the theme of decapitation in the story, literally, with the guillotine, but maybe symbolically too, like Wolfgang being cut off from feeling, from reality.
That's a fascinating reading. His intellectualism becomes a kind of prison, separating him from embodied experience, from empathy. He's living in his head, you could say.
A symbolic decapitation.
In a way, yes. He fails to truly connect with the horror unfolding around him until it confronts him directly and tragically. It could even echo Irving's own feelings, perhaps, of being detached from conventional life while pursuing art.
The whole story has this very dark, almost Poe-like feel. In fact, it influenced Poe, right?
It reportedly did, yes. And that darker tone. It suggests Irving was exploring things beyond charming folklore.
Do you think his own losses, witnessing turmoil, pushed him towards these morbid themes?
It seems highly probable. Personal grief, like losing Matilda and his brother, combined with observing the political instability in Europe. Those experiences can certainly make you contemplate the darker side of existence, the fragility of life, the strangeness of the human mind. It shows a depth to Irving we might sometimes overlook.
So after all those years in Europe, he finally comes back to the U.S. in 1832. He keeps writing, finds success again, even becomes a diplomat later on, minister to Spain.
That's right. He wrote his Western books, bought his home, Sunnyside, in Tarrytown, settled back into American life, though a much changed America.
Did those later experiences, like being minister to Spain during another period of upheaval, maybe reinforce his views on extremism?
It likely did. Seeing political instability firsthand would probably strengthen anyone's appreciation for order and moderation. And it's interesting that towards the end of his life, he dedicated himself to writing this massive biography of George Washington.
His namesake.
Exactly. A figure representing stability, unity, reasoned leadership. Perhaps after exploring darkness and witnessing chaos, he felt drawn to that kind of ideal.
He lived a long life, died in 1859, age 76. Looking back, it really feels like the adventure of the German student wasn't an outlier, but maybe a moment where different threads of his life came together.
I think that's a great way to see it. His early exposure to the eerie, his personal sorrows, his time in Europe absorbing its history and anxieties, his dislike of extremism. It all seems to swirl together in that particular story.
It complicates the picture of Irving, doesn't it? He wasn't just the cheerful storyteller.
Not at all. He had range. He understood light and shadow, the charming and the deeply unsettling. This story is proof of that complexity.
So for listeners going back to read The Adventure of the German Student, knowing more about Irving's life, what does that add?
It adds layers, definitely. You can appreciate the story not just as a spooky tale, but as potentially reflecting the author's own anxieties, his historical context, his grappling with loss, and the darker currents of the Romantic era. It makes you realize how personal history can subtly infuse fiction.
It really makes you look differently at authors you think you know well.
It does. So this deep dive hopefully encourages you to revisit the story. Think about Irving's journey, The losses, the travels, the times he lived through. How might those things echo in Wolfgang's fate, in the story's atmosphere? What other connections might jump out at you now, reading it with his life in mind? That's something fascinating to ponder as you experience Irving's chilling little masterpiece again.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.